This is the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro, and it's one of, if not, the best keyboard money can buy. Join me as I tell you all about the strange looking phenomenon and how it will save your wrists.
The first thought that may come to mind when you see it is, why does it look like that? But well, as I'm sure you can guess, it's for ergonomic reasons.
There are 3 different ergonomic sins your regular keyboard does that a split keyboard like this saves you from. Honor deviation is one of the biggest sins committed by your average keyboard. It is when your wrist is bent outward in the direction of the little finger. This can cause carpal tunnel among other issues. Being able to split your keyboard in half allows you to position your wrists apart in a much more comfortable typing position. Along with the issue of your hands being in an uncomfortable position, a regular keyboard can also make your shoulders too close together, causing back pain. Having a split board allows you to position each half as far apart as you want. You can even tilt your keyboard to an angle for a better typing posture. You don't walk around with your hands lying flat, so why would you type with your hands being completely flat? Typing with your hands flat, or also known as pronation, can cause the 2 bones in your wrist to cross and reduce blood flow, and over time, once again, lead to issues. By default, the Advantage 360 tackles this by being at a tented angle, and if you want, there are 2 other angles that make typing super comfortable. If you look down at your desk right now, you'll notice something. The keys on your keyboard are staggered, making it harder to press the correct key with the correct finger, and requiring more finger gymnastics. That's actually an old design, carried over from the typewriter of yore. The reason for this was to reduce jams, but we're not using typewriters, we're using computers. The design was just never changed when computers came about, as people were used to it. Thankfully, now you can get an ortholinear keyboard that will put all the keys in a straight line on each row, making it easier to press the correct key with the correct finger, and making it a much more comfy typing experience. The Advantage 360 takes it further than a lot of other split ergo boards and introduces some sweet concavity. Concavity is one of the big reasons this keyboard is so much better than other ergo keyboards like a Moonlander, but more on that later. Let's talk about what concavity actually is. Concavity is basically the curve in the keywell that makes the keys easier to reach and reduces strain on your wrist. If you look at the keys, you can see how certain keys are lower down at different levels. This is a part of the concavity and makes typing so much better. Furthermore, unlike a typical keyboard where you have to raise your wrist up to hit the keys, which can also lead to wrist issues, on the Advantage 360 the keywell is actually a bit lower down from where your palms rest, causing your hands to be in a much more natural and comfortable position for reaching every key. Your thumb is one of, if not your strongest finger, yet on a regular keyboard it's assigned to only press the space key? That makes no sense. So on the Advantage 360 you get given 6 keys under each one of your thumbs. Every single key is really easy to press and it makes typing feel so much more comfortable. One of the most important things to learn when you get a keyboard like this is the key layout. By default, the board comes with a very standard QWERTY layout, with a few tweaks. You'll notice the layout on here is about the equivalent to a 60% keyboard with a few extra keys, or in other cases you'll notice some keys have moved, such as on a standard keyboard right next to your pinky on the right side is caps lock, one of, if not the most useless keys. The default keyboard layout on here changes caps lock out to escape and puts caps lock here instead, a much more logical layout for most people. Like all ergo and small keyboards, by default this keyboard comes with layers. You get 3 layers out of the box, one for your function keys, a number pad layer, and a layer for backlight, Bluetooth and all those kind of things. The number pad layer is a great addition to those switching from a full-size keyboard. It puts all of the numbers and symbols you need right under your right hand. It's carried over key from the old Advantage too. I personally decided to remove this layer from my keyboard as I didn't make use of it on my old Advantage 2 ever, and I have a very unique keyboard layout we will talk about soon. The next layer is the function layer. This can be accessed by pressing one of the 2 function keys at the bottom of the left or right side of the keyboard. This is one of the few keys that's been added from the old Advantage 2. As the name implies, it adds function keys starting from the far right to the far left. It skips the key at the end of each cluster so that it becomes even, and you end up with the last key on the right being at 12. By default, this works great for the few times I need the F keys, but I also decided to add a few extra buttons in this layer. I changed where the caps lock and the arrow keys are to media keys. Now we're onto the final layer, the utility layer. This layer allows you to switch between 5 different Bluetooth profiles using the 1 through 5 keys. Furthermore, you can use this layer to toggle the backlight, increase or decrease the backlight, forget a Bluetooth device on a profile, turn off the status light, and show the battery status. The backlight doesn't really work too well on my specific board as I have the blank keycaps of PPT, which means nothing really shines through. But as you can see, if some ABS shine through keycaps, the backlight works really well.
Now that we're done talking about the default keyboard layout, let's talk about one of the biggest features of this keyboard, and that's ZMK.
If you come from someone like the Advantage 2, where you could remap keys from the keyboard itself and love that feature, well, you can't do that on the Pro model of the Advantage 360, you're going to have to dive into ZenMK to change any key unless you change the key at software level on your computer. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about how you get started with ZenMK and flash your keyboard. The first step is to go to Kinesis' GitHub and fork their repository with the software. Once you've done that, you have two options. If you follow strictly by Kinesis' rules, you can use a web GUI with less features, or you can dive into the ZenMK docs and write really cool and fancy keyboard layout. Let's check out the GUI first though. Once you go to the GUI, you log in with your GitHub and choose the repository with your keyboard layout. You can do some basic remapping here, but nothing too powerful. And there's a problem with this GUI. Once you start to edit the code itself for your keyboard, the GUI version of your layout doesn't update itself, which means once you make one change to the code instead of the GUI, you have to do everything else of code. But thankfully, as everything is open source, there's a way better GUI you can use that's all of the ZenMK features and updates along with your code. If you go to this website shown on screen over here, then all you have to do is log in with your GitHub and give it access to the repo with your Advantage config. It's very easy to use, and if you spend a bit of time looking at the ZenMK docs to understand the key codes and so on, you can get a really good keyboard layout set up very fast.
I've actually spoken to Kinesis about the better GUI, and I've showed it to them, and I've also given them feedback on what I think they can improve with the current GUI. But until they make those changes, which hopefully they do at some point soon, for now, this is the better GUI to use.
You can also write the code itself for your layout, not using a GUI if you don't want to, but that's only if you really hate GUIs with a passion, or you want to do something super fancy. Before I talk about my keyboard layout, I want to talk about flashing the keyboard, as this is one of the most important steps, and there are some tips and tricks I found with flashing. First, let's talk about how you're supposed to flash your keyboard the way Kinesis recommends. After you make changes to your layout, you push your changes to GitHub, and a build action kicks off. It takes around 2 to 4 minutes, but eventually you'll end up with a file in the output section to GitHub Actions. You then download the file, extract it, and you'll have two different files, a left and right file for firmware. The next step is connecting your keyboard to the computer with a wire, going into the utility layer, and pressing this key over here on the left one. Once you do that, your keyboard will appear like a USB drive on your computer. You take the left side of the firmware and drag it onto the left side and do the same steps to the right side, and boom, you're done. Quite a lengthy process to do, because you have to do it for both sides. But there's a few issues and tips I've learned when it comes to flashing. One of the biggest time changes you can do is that you only need to flash the left side, and it will also flash the right side at the same time. I'm not sure why Kinesis don't mention this themselves, but I've never flashed the right side, and it's still got all my mapping set up perfectly fine. Another thing I've encountered that's more of an issue is that you should be able to build the firmware locally with Docker or Portman, and it should use cache, except for the first build, to be quite a lot faster than GitHub Actions. Yet, every time I've ran the commands, I've seen others, and that the readme tells me to run, it doesn't work. It just keeps on erroring, which is super annoying, as that means I have to use GitHub Actions when I make a change to the keyboard, and GitHub Actions can take around 1 to 4 minutes on each run. Now that we've covered a lot of the software and the basics, we can get into the more interesting stuff. First up, my keyboard layout. I have completely revamped the default keyboard layout, so let's talk about what I've changed and why I changed it. First thing is,
I use Dvorak, by the way.
I have a few problems with regular Dvorak layout. Typing symbols isn't very well thought out for coding, which is what I'm doing a lot of the day. When I first started to realize that, I looked around for the internet and I found programmers Dvorak, but something just felt off about it, and then I found it. The lord of all Vim, Rust, and Dvorak activities, the Primogen, and I was shown the light of the real programmers Dvorak. Real programmers Dvorak is very close to regular Dvorak, but it makes some amazing changes. There is no need to deal with layers or anything. Your top row, where your numbers are by default, are replaced by symbols. This makes coding super fast, and to get to your numbers, you just press Shift plus whatever number you want. How does the Advantage 360 compare to other popular Ergo keyboards? There are two keyboards I'm going to compare the Advantage 360 to: last generation's Advantage 2 and the Moonlander. For the former, it holds up quite well compared to the Advantage 360, but falls short on build quality and customization options, and for the latter, the build quality holds up almost as well, the customization holds up almost as well, but compared to the Advantage 2 and 360, the ergonomics are just lacking. The build of the Advantage 360 is a mix of metal and plastic. It's not hollow at all, has a nice heft, and feels very premium to type on. Yeah, on the last generation Advantage 2, you do not get nowhere near as good build quality, even though at an eye-staggering price of $330. The keyboard was hollow, tinny, and completely plastic, yet you were paying for the ergonomics, something no other keyboard could really offer unless you had a 3D printer hand, which most people don't. Overall though, I'd say compared to the last generation, the Advantage 360 360 is a really nice upgrade, and if you get the Pro version, you get the added benefits of having a B wireless and ZMK. The Moonlander though is a different case. Look, I love the Moonlander, but it can't be held to the same level of ergonomics as the Advantage 360 or the Advantage 2. Sure, as an ortholinear layout, it's split, it has some tenting, but it's missing the concavity, arguably one of the best features of any ergo board, and while Oryx may be better than the default GUI the Advantage 360 comes with, it's still lacking features compared to ZMK if you spent a bit of time reading the docs. I'm planning on retiring my Moonlander to a travel keyboard, as unlike the Advantage 360, it came with a nice travel case, and I got silent switches so that I'll be able to take it around with me. Speaking of switches, why don't we do a little sound test of all three of these boards.
We're almost done now, but there are a few little bits we need to go over before wrapping up. First up, battery life.
Battery life is great. I don't really have any issues with it, although sometimes the battery life indicator says one side of the keyboard is low battery, even though it's not, and after a few minutes it changes to be correct. I've only had to charge the keyboard once since I got it, and that was almost a month ago now. One issue I did have was while I was charging, I didn't know what was going on, as there was no status that it was charging, and I was very confused as my keyboard just flat out stopped working for 5-ish hours, with no signs that it was charging, even though it was plugged in, the lights were just red. But eventually, it worked once there was a charge. Speaking of red lights, let's talk about the Bluetooth issues.
You love it when you unpair the keyboard from your computer just to show how sometimes the issues can be frustrating to pair, and the keyboard is doing exactly what you were talking about. You'd think maybe the behavior would have fixed itself, but no. No matter what I do, I've gone into the layer over here to reset the connection. I've removed it, I've turned the keyboard on and off, turned my Bluetooth on and off. Whatever I do, it's refusing to connect. Now God knows if it's the keyboard or Linux, because mouse is working fine. This mouse is on Bluetooth, this one is. Headphones are working fine. But the keyboard, no matter what I do, let's try something like this, I don't know, flat out refuses to pair. If I just press pair over here, just pairing request failed. Pair, pairing request failed. Trust, then pair. Flat out doesn't work.
To be fair though, majority of the time, the Bluetooth works great. Look, before I got the keyboard, I read online about people complaining about all sort of issues to do with Bluetooth, and I was worried. But after I got it, I realised so many people were over-exaggerating, and other than the two halves not connecting sometimes, the Bluetooth is great, and it's so nice not to have wires on my desk. Overall, this is one of the best keyboards I've ever used, and if you're in the market for an ergonomic keyboard that will last you for a long time to come, there is no other keyboard I could recommend higher. Disclaimer, Kinesis sent me the keyboard for free in exchange for a review, but that does not mean they paid for any good coverage or anything like that. All thoughts and opinions are my own, I just really like their products. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.